All right, so I'm going to be doing a quick demo using the watercolor pastels that we're going to be using for color in drawing 2. So I'm going to make this as short as possible because I want to just kind of demo how I see form, and especially how I work with color. The way I want to teach this course is something that's really important to me, how we can see shapes without having to draw their outlines. And so that's why the composite was so important in the Dr. Strange perspective process and going from composites to full value studies. So that's the same way as I'm going to treat this color. And so everyone will have the same colors that we'll pass out in lab. And everyone will be starting with achromatic and monochromatic paintings and drawings first. But I'm going to do a full palette to kind of just show you what it looks like using the pastels and how I think about layering, and then using the watercolor character of the pastel. So the first thing I'm going to show you is I'm going to use 2 brushes. One is the 1/2 inch flat, and then I have a size 4 round. The round is just going to be able to get like some of those smaller positive shapes that I can't reach with the flat. And the flat will help me get broad shapes with water. So right now I'm using a gessoed canvas. Right now, I was using a Reeves BFK, but I accidentally dipped my watercolor brush into my oil paint thinner and ruined that watercolor, and it ruined my demo and my Reeves BFK, and wasted about an hour because I was almost done with the drawing, and then I ruined it. And so I wanted to start over, and this is the only thing that I had left. The Reeves BFK handled really well as long as you didn't put too much water on there. So I'm going to share the still life that I'm looking at. That I'm using a photograph to help me with this, so that I can share with y'all the photograph, and you can be looking along with what I'm painting and what I'm looking at and what I'm talking about. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the orange pastel to kind of composite the still life. And so I'm going to be using comparative measurements. I'm not going to be using siding or siding with lines and organizational line, or trying to make sure that it's perfect in translation. I'm going to be using comparative measurements, which means I'm going to draw something and then as close as possible to accuracy, and then use that measurement to get the drawing finished. So I'm going to start with the bowl. The canvas has a lot of tooth on it. So I'm just lightly brushing the pastel across, getting those forms in, getting that lip of the bowl. And I'm not too concerned with covering the whole surface with the pastel. I don't want to oversaturate this area, this first layer, because I'm just trying to get a composite flat overall shape without any form. I'm just trying to look at the overall darks and establishing those. as I'm going, using this pale pastel. The reason I use this orange is because I'm looking at that and it seems pretty warm overall inside most of the forms, and then the highlights get cool. Some of the shadows inside have some cooler temperatures, but overall I could draw this first layer using the orange pastel. So I also have a paper towel in my hand so that when I use the brush, I'm not getting too much water on my surface, because I don't need too much water, especially for this. It is watercoloring, but I don't want it to just be that, because I want to be able to use parallel hatching throughout and not rely solely on the flatness of what watercolor can be. I want it to still feel like a drawing in some areas too. So you can see how little color can make it so saturated on this first layer. I'm going to use the excess color to just gesture the fabric. And I've already established in my brain where I'm going to be creating a lot of detail and where I'm going to keep it more watercolory and more abstract. So I've already made those implications and decisions in my head. So you can see that this is all, the same value, but as I move through the form, it starts to have some sense of light and shadow and shape, protecting those lights all the way throughout. Again, I'm using comparative measurements. So once I got my composition where I wanted that bowl to be, I definitely wanted it to be a little more centered and more so than not. And the canvas is actually is really nice. I mean, you can buy a roll of canvas. You can use canvas pad or watercolor pad. If you find out that in your studies that you do not like using the Rees VFK, you can go ahead and purchase some, watercolor paper, canvas pad, because it does have a like, if you're heavy-handed like I am, this is definitely nicer. So I'm glad that I had that huge accident, although I was really upset in the last bits of my drawing demo, my first demo attempt, because I was almost done, and then I was like, what is happening with this medium? It's supposed to be awesome. And I realized that I was dipping right into my turpentine jar, but I moved that jar off my table. But so you can see that I'm still just using whatever water I had and whatever color is on here. You can see that I pushed all the color that I had on there around without having to load any more color than necessary. And so that's what's really cool about this medium too, is you can just keep drawing with it, with the water. Okay. So that's looking pretty solid. I'm gonna get my paper towel and kind of pick up some of that moisture. This helps speed the drying process a lot. Just getting a paper towel and just kind of patting it down, picking up some of the excess water so I can start laying down more color. So I'm gonna get ahead and just kick that dark really nicely. I'm gonna be using parallel hatching a lot. I've talked about that in my labs a lot, about using parallel hatching to get the values that I need. So again, I'm not going into the form and creating an outline. I am bringing up value in terms of zones. Right now I'm using the black over the orange that I've laid down. And I'm not coloring it in all the way to the dark that I need it to be, because I'm going to use watercolor wash, and I'm going to be using more color inside of that. So I don't need it to be all black. I just want to take that value down as far as I can. I'm going to come in here and also do that to the apple. Where it's darkest. And knock that shadow in. Looking pretty good. I'm going to cross hatch against some of the parallel hatching, especially where it's darkest. So now I turn my hands and I move my stroke. So instead of going diagonal to get the parallel hatching, I am now going across it, making a cross hatch, and that makes my zone darker and thus creating more believable form. And so when you add black, you're kind of cooling everything down, graying everything down. So what I'm gonna do is, I see in the brass that there's a lot more warmth going on, so I'm gonna come in and cross hatch some red to warm it all up. I'm gonna use some brown too. The brown is actually a cool brown, so when you're using brown, make sure you're realizing that you're adding some gray, some blue into the color that you're drawing into using brown. And the reason I know this is because I've played with it. So once you start experimenting with your colors, you're gonna start to realize you have to either make mental notes all the time, which is what I do. That's how I work. It's like I'm very intuitive with the flow. I'm like, okay, the black is making everything gray, bluish. Let's make sure I layer reds and oranges on that black so that it doesn't become dead. And so depending on how you work and how you think, you might be wanting to definitely write stuff down. To help you through the process. I'm gonna parallel hatch some brown over this light area. And see, I'm protecting my brights too. I'm protecting this zone of bright right here. I need some yellow. It's the transition color. The transition color from the dark to the light is your most vibrant color. I'll be talking about that as I get to the more vibrant colors. That the transition color is the most intense color when you're looking at representational, or when you're drawing from life and creating form. I'm gonna load my brush up now with some water, my half-inch flat, and I'm gonna see what I've created. So you can see how dark it gets. The color is when you use the watercolor feature of this medium, it becomes it's so vibrant and so strong, and it's beautiful. I love the way it works. It just works like a like a painting and a drawing. That's what's really cool about this, is I'm drawing and painting, and so it's a nice way to learn form quickly without having to deal with paint. Strictly, because then I can create form with cross-hatching over this watercolor. So this is my third time actually drawing this subject. I drew it in class first, just to make sure that the Rees VFK was going to handle the color really well, and it turns out that it does handle it nicely. You just got to be careful about oversaturating it. And then I did it again and then messed up because I dipped my brush into the oil paint thinner on accident because it was next to my water. And then now I'm doing it again, so I really know the subject so well, and that really helps a lot. If you do some studies with this medium, don't get discouraged the first time you use it, because it is kind of it's a interesting medium. It feels like you have no control, but then the beauty of it, once you start to feel the control, it's really amazing. So I added some white into those highlights just to pick that back up. Now, when you're adding white to your drawings with the white pastel, just remember that you're actually adding blue also. You're adding blue to your color. So when you're trying to make a warm color feel like it's getting brighter, you have to remember, okay, I'm making this highlight really cold because I'm adding a lot of white. I have to remember to bring it back to its warm tone by using either yellow or oranges or other colors to get that equalized, because otherwise you're just gonna have a really cold highlight that's dead, and you won't have that transition color, and it won't look as realistic as you hope to get it. And so you see, I'm building up in zones. I'm not building up with going from the outline in. I'm going from darks to lights. Especially with this medium, you want to make sure that you're making sure you're building up in zones like this. It'll just be really nice, especially if you want to work like this. If you want to work like this, where you don't have any planned out drawing, you just want to build something from zones, from ambiguous to tight. It's a very addictive process, and this is how you do it. You comparative measure and you build up in zones. So I don't know how well you can see the colors right now, how we'll be able to see it in lecture, but we're going from darks to lights, and it gets kind of gray in the transition color. So I'm adding red into this area, and I'm adding a lot of red because that transition color is actually the most vibrant part of the brass bowl. And that transition color is really what's going to make it feel like my shadows are really rich richer than they actually are. And so the canvas is actually handling really well. You know, it's looking less like a pastel drawing than I was thinking it would using canvas, or using the canvas, but it's actually kind of nice. So if you want to make it look more like a painting than a drawing, using canvas is nice, but putting down the pastel looks really weird. It's very toothy. The color skips a lot. It's very broken, but it has a nice texture to it. And then I add the water, and it's just like a beautiful fluid drawing. So I added dark red to the areas where I added some dark, where I parallel hatched the shadows in the apple. So I added red back in there to kind of give it more color than just black. And what's really awesome is that you can just keep parallel hatching and stacking color on top of each other. Now I'm going to parallel hatch my transition color, which is super vibrant red. That apple looks so vibrant and like has lots of form because those transition colors are so accurate. You can even see in the corner of this apple there is a bright red, and another bright red up in here, and then a really strong reflected light. So I'm just gonna load that pastel. I'm using a lot of pressure right now on that area because it's a pretty dark, vibrant red, and I wanna make sure that I get that reflected light because that's that area inside the core shadow. It makes it look like $1 million pesos. Just kidding, $1 million. So I'm just gonna add just a tiny bit of water to see what I have there. I'm gonna add the white to the highlight, and remember, I'm adding blue, which that highlight is pretty cool in terms of temperature. It's pretty cold in my reference, so it's kind of okay that it's very cold. But I'm gonna go ahead and add that transition of yellow and orange into the red from the highlight, so that way it's not just going from red to pink. It feels like it's a highlight for a warm object, which is the apple is pretty warm. Not so much pink, it's more red. So I added a lot more black, and then I'm parallel hatching with red. Using much more pressure this time to really get that medium in there. So I picked up the green because I'm gonna carve that shape of the apple with the background, which is that green apple. I'm gonna parallel hatch some green into that apple, and then use the watercolor effect to see that form before I go on. All right, I'm going to go ahead and add the background. The stem kind of pokes out, but I'm gonna kind of experiment without having to draw the stem in yet, and see if I can put the stem on top of something that I've drawn in watercolor with, just to test that out and see if it works. I haven't gotten to that part yet of the demo, and so I want to see if it'll actually work in this video, and if not, then we might have to think about protecting small details. But I imagine that we can definitely add on top, especially because this is water soluble. We can use other mediums on top of it to get something that we need that's sharp or has a strong highlight. And put some brown on top of that. So that was straight black. Now I'm just kind of glazing some brown. Not really any formula, just kind of going back over it with some brown. That way there's at least some color in there and it's not just black. There's not too much water in here. I don't want to go crazy happy, you know, thinking, oh, I just need a bunch of water because I have this area, but because if I use all that water can drip and I'll have black dripping all over my painting, and it's not something that I want, but it's something that I want to avoid. Now you can play with drips if you want in your experiments, or you know, if you want to have that quality of drawing and painting. You can see that's so cool. This medium is so cool because I can keep that scumble look if I wanted to, or I can quiet the textures down using the watercolor technique. It's like literally just calming down that background. Now, something about the canvas that I'm noticing is it's not as rich as when you use paper. When you use paper and you do this black, it's like mesmerizing. It's like, wow, it's so black. Okay, so that's looking pretty nice to me. I'm gonna go ahead and render this apple. Cross hatch some red into that black. And get that shadow there, get that transition color pop in the very top left. I'm gonna bring in some of that black. Then I'm going to use the flat again to see what I got. I'm gonna pick some of that up with my paper towel. Got kind of dirty where I don't want it to be that dirty. Parallel hatching. me go ahead, go back into the bowl now. Get some of those dark shadows. See how intense my highlights are actually. Because right now I'm kind of confused on whether or not my highlight is strong enough. So I'm going to come back in and get those shadows pretty deep with some cross hatching and parallel hatching. And maybe I might not watercolor over this. I might use the texture of drawing to really help me get some vibrancy. I'm going to cross hatch into the shadows, start building that up so I have a real sense of light and direction. I'm going to use the watercolor technique to see how resolved this area actually is, because I might just leave it with the watercolor wash where the fabric is, so I have a nice softness, and I can play with that idea. A soft and hard edges, soft and more drawing techniques with cross hatching in the areas of focus. I'm going to move the phone so y'all can see, what I have. It's on the front facing camera, so. Hopefully that gives you a clearer picture of what we're seeing. So, let's see. Okay, let's get the apples in there, really nice. I'm gonna use some green in the shadows of the apples now. The complementary color of red is green, and so that'll really help me get that deep shadow. I'll also be using black to knock down the vibrancy of it so that I have the vibrancy of red and green working together, making a nice gray, but I also have the black to tone down some of the textures and blend the green and red together even more so. That's looking nice. Again, just playing with the black and red and brown. Also throwing in some oranges in there where there seems to be a little bit more lift from the dark into a warm tone. That orange is pretty bright in amongst all those darks. So where it's darkest, I'm going to take those textures back using the water and some dry brushing. So it's not, my brush isn't that all the way dry, but it's definitely not as wet as it can be. But by working those darks in even more, it helps me take those darks and make them look even deeper by pushing the texture of my scumbling farther back. So I'm using black and red again in that area. And I'm going to push those colors together. And go into the fabric here. Glaze some of those darks that I have brought from the ground into the fabric up there. Then I'm going to tone down the white. I'm going to parallel hatch some brown into the highlight of the fabric and then brush that so that there's color there and it's not just super bright white. Bringing in this green into the dark shadow is actually helping so much. So always remember your complementary colors to make shadows for your object. So if you have a red object, use your greens to create shadows as well as your blacks. I like using black. I don't have a problem using black all the time as long as you know that you have to do something to it or you'll just have black in your color. It won't blend together very well. I'm gonna get my small round, my 12 round. I'm gonna bring some red into the shadow of the green apple. Since I have a green object, I'm using this complementary to make the shadow. I'm also going to bring in more yellow into the highlight. And then more green into the transition. And lastly, I'm going to bring some black into the deepest edge. All right, so I'm going to parallel hatch really lightly against the background. So that's not just white, even though it's really close to being white. I'm gonna get the fabric shadow here. Bring in that black and brown so I can get the back lip of the bowl. All right. Now, what am I looking at? Cool. Add more highlight to this area. Now that it's drier, it'll pick up some of that highlight. I'm going to cross hatch some black, parallel hatch them. And I'm going to get some black into the shadow of the right fabric, just barely any because it's such a soft fabric. And we'll see how that does. I kind of like the lyrical quality of the fabric right here, so I'm going to play with that. Then I'm gonna make sure I get that fabric shadow as it pours over the lip of the bowl. Get a little more lift. Gonna soften it up a little bit. All right. Class will be ending right before this, so this will definitely be available to you all. I'm just gonna go ahead and finish the drawing, and that way y'all can have this to look at, to hear some of the techniques that I used, and how I think about color. So I'm just gonna cross hatch some of those forms with black, very light black, and cross hatch some brown where those areas are getting darker. Then this silk has some blue in it, so I'm just gonna parallel hatch some blue right there to make sure that I cross hatch with some brown to tone it down, because it'll look like blue sky, and make sure it doesn't stay that way. It might look like blue sky, yeah, once I do that, but I'll use the brown to tone that down. So you can see I'm switching gears because I don't want it all to feel boring and the same. So I'm switching gears on my gesture and how much water I'm using. That way it creates really nice difference in where our eyes are looking at and where our eyes can be drawn. So, and especially if I think about you know, the abstraction of this fabric, it just would be more fun to look at if it all didn't look the same. So again, I created that highlight just by making sure that I'm using the background to carve out shapes, positive shapes. Instead of outlining that highlight, all I did was carve out the shape. Get my point, and get some of these nice reds blended in. Oh yeah, see that those hints of notes, that outer edge where I really planted that red in there, and then using some water just to get it spread out just a little more even across the texture, makes it feel so vibrant. But it's not just that it's not just because the red was vibrant, it's because I'm also playing with the idea of complementary colors in the shadows. So that red is vibrant, not because it's black and red, but because there's a complementary color. That green is making the red just vibrate. Even though it's not like Christmas green, it's still working in that same way. And what's really awesome about this is that I can keep adding layers to the darks, and it's just making it much more vibrant. This is like maybe 3 layers, and now adding a 4th layer, and it's just even better than it was before. But with the paper doesn't take very many layers to be vibrant. But with canvas, it looks like that I need extra work to get it to the level that you need for paper. There's enough pastel medium now that I can use my finger to blend. it blends nicely with your finger. But if there's a lot of water on there, then it won't blend as nice. I'm using red as a transition color a lot in this bowl. I'm gonna add some yellow to this area that's catching highlight from the back of the apple. I'm gonna use my point to blend it out a little bit. I'm gonna add some black to this area that's catching some cast shadow, and then a little bit of green on top of that. Nice. Oh, it's looking so cool. I like what's happening so far. I haven't resolved this area yet. It's closest to the camera, so this will be good. I'm basically going to parallel hatch a brown. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 6 marks. And then some black, 1, 2, 3. And then some of that orange. So you can see how little of the darks I needed to before it like makes it too dark. So you can see I had 3, 4 brown marks, 3 or 4 black marks, a lot more orange so that there's color going in. Now that I can see what's happening, I'm probably adding some black in there. I'm gonna stand up, step back real quick. Yeah, it's looking nice to me. You know, when I am drawing like this and doing works all at once, I look at this and I see, oh, that's kind of cool. You know, I could make that more resolved, the flat black if I wanted to, but I don't want to make that decision yet. I kind of want to play with some highlight here using the white. I haven't used much white, you know, unless I really know that I need it, because it kind of just makes it gray. It doesn't really do much when it gets watered, but it can at least lift some areas. I'm putting water back into this area because I think it's too distracting color. Now if I resolved it a little more to show you that there's a reflection of light coming in, then it might make more sense, but I kind of like what's happening right now, especially for, you know, a quick demo. It definitely works for me, and I mean, works for me artistically. But I'm going to create a sense that there is a fall off here, that there's an edge of the table. I like that there's a little break. I'm going to go ahead and use some brown to transition from this black to white. So I basically just gave it a brown outline, but I'm going to use it to transition into the white. So it makes a nice color, and it feels like, oh, that's part of the table. I can show you all the transition color in that example. So you can see that it goes from black to the brown into the table. So you can see, for people who want to be really realistic, what's gonna what you're gonna have to deal with is time. Now I can definitely, I have the ability definitely to go in here and make this work super realistically with this medium. And the reason I definitely wanted a demo was because people who feel like they can only be realistic with a certain medium, and I somehow, or there's people out there that are trying to keep you from being super realistic. That's not the case. See, I can keep adding color with this, and it's just like painting, and it's just like drawing, except that it's different because you can use two sides of it. You can use drawing, and you can use drawing and painting. And what I like about this stuff is you can just lift it up so easy. See, I revealed back that light fabric. If you remember, this part of these highlights of the fabric are that orange that I used at the beginning, and it kept working for me up until, you know, to the very end. So that first color isn't so arbitrary. It's planned. It's not very important, but it can help you finish the drawing, and that's why I like playing with the building up from a zone, because if I built up from the orange, which created a composite, which I built a value study off of it, built zones off of it, and I could leave it exposed, and it'll benefit me. So you can see the difference between a more realized fabric, more gestural fabric. Now that gestural fabric feels more exciting to me than this in terms of a drawing like this. It just depends how you want to do it. you just have to know that if you want to be more realistic, you need more time, and you need to make that time. No one can make that time for you. If you want to be more realistic, you have to make the time outside the studio to make sure that you can pull it off. That's just the nature of the work. I even know when I'm about to make a super realistic painting, I'm like, okay, this one's going to take me 3 weeks, and then and I know that I have to make it last that long, or it's, you know, it won't look as realistic as possible. Now with this stuff, I started an hour ago and talked for a lot through it, but I have a completed and realized drawing, and like you can feel the light coming from a source. You can feel what's happening in the painting, and to me that makes it a successful painting drawing. And what I like about this medium is that I keep saying drawing and I keep saying painting, and you're like, well, which one is it? It's both. That's what's really cool about it. I'm drawing and I'm painting. So I'm getting to the parts that I really get excited about. It's when you add like a red color, a vibrant color, and you're like, oh, that made it so much better. And so I'm getting to those parts, and it's really fun, really exciting. The first part is the hardest part, making sure everything's going to work together. Let's see. You need to make sure that shape looks good. I forgot to resolve this area where it gets really bright because it reflects against the fabric, and so it looked like the bowl was really lopsided. Not to worry. Just a quick addition of that orange, a wash, some black to tone it down. Parallel hatching again. Alright, I'm going to smooth out this texture. It's kind of distracting to me, so I'm going to add another layer of water on top of it. Much better. Okay, let's see. I'm going to get the yellow. I'm going to make that stem. And I'm going to see what it does if I add that pure yellow and get my small point. It gets kind of lost, so I'm going to use orange also. And I'm going to use white. Bring back some orange. Attack it with yellow. I need some red for the shadow. There we go. Just a few lot of colors, stacking of colors, and adding a wash, and then adding another color until it felt like it was a stem. This one in the back, just gonna dab it with some black, and then I'm gonna soften that black. There, it feels like a stem. I'm going to sharpen up this side of the apple. And get that green, carve the shape of the apple in there. So at this point, I'm not sure, you can tell what's happening, but I just want to show you guys, it's like, oh, he's done, but at the same time, I could, it's one of those things where you can just keep playing, keep adding detail until you're either sick of what you're looking at, or you run out of time. Add the highlight of that bowl. Looking good, looking good. I'm getting more excited. Stepping back, seeing how it's reading from afar. Tone down this shadow, make sure that it's looking right. Also warm it up a lot. It's very cold. I'm parallel hatching with some brown. I'm gonna use some black. And a few lines of red. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. Cool. All right. There's some cool light reflecting right here. It's not that cool. I'm gonna warm it up with some glazes of yellow. Soften up my finger. It's like a touch of red. I'm gonna soften it up with a semi-wet brush. Oops. Make sure your pastels are clean, especially with the white. It gets kind of dirty if you put it into areas that have a lot of black. Picking it up with the brush. If it's wet and you just kind of touch it and then clean it off and then pick it up again, your brush acts like a sponge and cleans areas up. You know? It feels like I've made up my mind about whether or not I want the black to be covered. I kind of want it to be covered, but I think I'm just gonna do some thin washes just to tone down the white. And it's like a happy medium of both worlds. Like a little more activity over there. I'm gonna punch some red in. All right. Okay. So at this point, I kind of reached a place where I like it, but I've grown accustomed to it over this hour, and so it's mostly thinking, oh, maybe I want to lift some paint or some color ups from an area. Maybe I want to smooth out some areas, resolve areas. So there's a lot of questions that I'll have, with rested eyes and a different day. So I'll post a picture of this on Canvas also with some detailed shots so you can see how loose some areas are in terms of zones of value and zones of color. And I hope y'all enjoy it. I did this so we could all see together how I view certain forms. All right, thank you.